September 1918, a 28-year-old woman was dragged out of her prison cell into a garden inside of Moscow by a group of executioners. A senior soldier and official in the Soviet Union pulled out his pistol and then fired a bullet into the back of her head. And then, following her execution, her remains were shoved into a barrel, which was then set on fire. But this was not just any woman. This was a woman who was seen as an assassin who had tried to take out the most powerful man in the Soviet Union, Vladimir Lenin. Despite her assassination attempt initially going wrong and not being successful, Lenin was affected by the actions of Fanny Kaplan for the rest of his life, and some have claimed that the bullet, which was left inside of his body following the attack, actually caused his strokes, which led to his death, leading to the conclusion that Fanny Kaplan's actions that day led to the death of the leader of the Soviet Union. But what happened with her execution, and why was it so brutal? Fanny Kaplan was born on the 10th of February 1890, and little is known about her childhood or early life. Her family were Jewish, and she was raised by her father, who was a teacher in the local school. She grew up with many sisters and brothers and was known by them as Dora. Fanny Kaplan was schooled at home, but she did leave to raise more money for the family, taking a job working in a mill in Odessa. However, at some point she became much more politically aware and active, and she became exposed to the revolutionary actions, and she joined the socialist revolutionaries. But at the age of 16, she was arrested inside of a major city for being a dissident. This was very dangerous, and many people who were in opposition to the Soviet government often disappeared, being sent to hard labour camps or being executed or tortured to death. Fanny Kaplan was captured after a bomb had exploded which she had created and made with her partner, and she was linked to being involved in a plot to assassinate high-ranking government officials. She was then sentenced to a period of life in a hard labour prison camp, being sent to the tough conditions of Serbia, and whilst here she was subjected to brutal treatment. Kaplan lost her eyesight through what had happened inside of the prison camp. She became partially blind and was also, it's believed, beaten very badly. But shockingly, she was not left to rot inside of Serbia, as on the 3rd of March 1917 she was freed from the prison camp after the February Revolution, and this huge moment in history would bring down the Tsar and his royal ruling family. She was in her 20s, and he was hugely affected by what had happened while she was imprisoned, and Fanny Kaplan suffered with many medical issues, including problems with her sight. These ranged from crippling migraines, and she would further lose her sight at times, and she had lost a huge amount of weight because of the treatment that she suffered. But she continued to work to become a dissident to the hierarchy, and there was a huge amount of conflict and issues between her Socialist Revolutionary Party and also the Bolsheviks who came to power. They had a huge amount of support in Russia, but in the November of 1917 they could not achieve a majority in the elections, and later a social revolutionary member was elected to become the president months later. This caused chaos, and the Bolsheviks ordered that the Constituent Assembly should be closed and shut down, and the Bolsheviks took action to secure power, and they banned and arrested many political rivals and members of political parties. The socialist revolutionaries were attacked by the Bolsheviks, and Fanny Kaplan also began to realise that life could become quite dangerous for her. But, in particular, there was one man who she hated, and this was Vladimir Lenin, a man who is often considered to have been one of the most significant people of the 20th century. She began to consider the best way of dealing with him once and for all, and she settled on planning and plotting an assassination attempt. She saw Lenin as an enemy of hers, and someone who had turned his back on people who he should have been supporting, and she wanted to ensure that Lenin could not do any more damage to politics. Fanny Kaplan then studied the plans that Lenin had, and she chose a specific day and meeting to strike and attack him, and this would then take place on the 30th of August 1918. Lenin then travelled to a weapons factory in the south of Moscow, which was known as the Hammer and Sickle. Fanny Kaplan went there too, and she was armed with a weapon, and she was one of the crowd who had gathered to capture a sight of Lenin, who was inspecting the factory. She situated herself close to the exit of the building that Lenin would come out of, and he did this after he met with a number of workers. Lenin was not on his own. He was flanked by a number of other guards who helped him towards a car to drive him, presumably back to the Kremlin. But as Lenin got out of the car, Fanny Kaplan screamed out to him, and Lenin did the fateful thing. He turned around to see who was shouting him, and he looked towards her direction. As Lenin did this, Fanny Kaplan took out her Browning pistol and fired 3 shots at him. One of the bullets struck Lenin's coat, passing through his jacket and missing him. Another bullet was more successful, and this bullet struck Lenin in the neck, and it punctured part of his lung, and the bullet then rested near to the right collarbone of the leader. The other bullet hit him in the left shoulder, and after this Lenin was quickly bundled back into the car to be taken to his house in the Kremlin. However, he refused to be treated by doctors and medical officials and did not trust that a larger coup was not occurring. He didn't realise this was a lone attacker, and he needed to go to the hospital to try and have the bullets removed from his body in a clean operating theatre. But he refused the treatments, and the doctors tried to do the best to take the bullets out, but they could not do this because of Lenin's refusal, and the bullets were therefore left inside of him. But the assassination attempt was not immediately successful, and after shooting Lenin, Fanny Kaplan was jumped on and she was quickly arrested and seized. One witness claimed he heard 3 shots, and then a suspicious-looking woman was arrested, and other witnesses claimed that it was children who turned her over to the police. She was taken to prison to be interrogated, and she thought that nothing could be worse than what she'd experienced inside of the hard labour camp in Serbia. But during her interrogation she was tortured badly, and it was claimed that she signed a confession which stated, "My name is Fanny Kaplan. Today I shot Lenin. I did it on my own. I will not say from whom I obtained my revolver. I will give no details. I had resolved to kill Lenin long ago. I consider him a traitor to the revolution. I was exiled to Akatui for participating in an assassination attempt against a Tsarist official in Kivik. I spent 11 years at hard labour. After the revolution, I was freed. I favoured the Constituent Assembly, and am still for it." It's not known if Fanny Kaplan signed this herself under duress, but she was seemingly proud of what she'd done. A military commander who felt threatened by her eventually gave evidence against her, claiming that Fanny Kaplan was a member of the socialist revolutionaries who had gathered to try and kill Lenin. He stated that Kaplan was the best person to shoot Lenin as she was not suspicious in a crowd, and as she was a woman it was less likely to be suspicious, but what must be considered is the health of Fanny Kaplan. Let's remember she was partially sighted and almost blind, so how could she have successfully shot at her target? Also, no witnesses admitted they saw her shoot the gun, and it's also been claimed that the bullets which were later removed from Lenin after his death were different to the ones which were shot from the weapon that Kaplan had. However, she refused to give over any information that would implicate others, and with this she was sentenced to death. Her execution was one which was performed ruthlessly and quickly. Fanny Kaplan, on the 3rd of September 1918, was grabbed from her prison cell, and she was thrust out into the garden by the commander of the Kremlin PD, Markov, and a group of Latvian Bolsheviks who had gathered. Her execution pulled out a pistol and in Soviet fashion quickly shot Fanny Kaplan in the back of her head. But this was not the end of her death ordeal. To deal with her body and remains once and for all, the body was collected and was placed inside of a barrel which was then set on fire and was reduced to a pile of ashes and nothing. The same man who gave the order to do this would be the man who ordered the execution of the Tsar and his family, but there were a number of suspicious rumours that Fanny Kaplan had been sent back quietly to Serbia for hard labour. But Lenin did suffer with the injuries that he had sustained that day for the rest of his life. The effects of the bullets shot and fired by Fanny Kaplan may have actually led to his strokes and his poor health, that later led to his death. But would this make Fanny Kaplan a successful assassin? She was, at the age of 28, executed inside of a garden by Lenin's death squad, and she had a rough life and treatment for years before her death, being locked up as a political dissident. But could Fanny Kaplan have successfully carried out the attack on Lenin? It is disputed, but what cannot be argued is the fate of her and the shocking treatment of her remains after her execution. Thank you for watching, and support, please subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.